te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, they resisted, but now the government's revealed plans for a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the pandemic response. The COVID minister is live. Meanwhile, the Labour government always said it would be open and transparent. Now an investigation by the Ombudsman will effectively put that claim to the test. Auckland's mayor is pledging a rates hike of less than 5% next year, despite claims of a debt crisis. We asked the Deputy Mayor, how's that going to work? And a Kiwi company takes a swing at the international golf ball market. And believe us, balls are big money. You can watch us live, Sky Channel 83 or Freeview Channel 50. RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Ahi Marie, good afternoon. I'm Evie Ashton. The government has announced details of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into its COVID-19 response. The Prime Minister says it's the right thing to do, given the COVID emergency was the most significant threat to New Zealanders' health and the economy since World War II. Jacinda Ardern says the scope of the inquiry will be wide-ranging.
We'll cover specific aspects of our health response, such as our border, community care, isolation, quarantine, as well as the economic response, and that does include broadly monetary policy. We'll not consider individual decisions, such as how policies applied to an individual case or circumstance.
The COVID response minister, Aisha Verrill, says the inquiry will also look at public health, which will include vaccination requirements put in place to deal with COVID-19.
And in addition, communication enabling communication with communities. So I think that captures the ability to see whether mandates were an appropriate tool on those issues of social life.
The Royal Commission will begin in February and is expected to conclude in mid-2024. It will be headed by epidemiologist Professor Tony Blakely from Australia. A GP who sent unsolicited anti-vax messages to 600 patients has been censured by the Health and Disability Commission. Last year, the GP, who's a member of an anti-vax group, accessed his practice's records to send the text. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
The message urged people not to get vaccinated against COVID-19 and directed them to an anti-vax website. 11 people complained to the Commission, some saying they were shocked, others that the message was dangerous and they hadn't sought advice on vaccines. The Commission says the information the GP sent was not balanced and many people found it distressing. It says he should apologise to each patient. The doctor no longer has a practicing certificate.
Travellers may be set for significant delays this holiday season, with Auckland Airport short of 1,600 staff. Auckland Airport Chief Executive Kerry Hurihanganui is warning passengers may face long waits during the peak Christmas travel season as a result of the staff shortage, and is urging people to plan ahead. Shortages include cabin crew, airline check-in, baggage handling, security, airport operations and emergency services. An airport recruitment drive in July resulted in 500 new positions being filled, which was well short of a goal of filling 3,000 jobs available at the time. No charges will be laid against a far north property owner who caused a massive fire that left 30 families shut out of their homes for days. Investigators say the 2,800-hectare Kaimomo fire started last December on cleared land earmarked for avocado orchards. Fire and Emergencies Te Hiku Region Manager Ron Devlin says the property owner had a permit to burn debris, but a flare-up in strong winds and high temperatures sent the fire out of control.
Sometimes there are what we call accidents, and this was an accident. Everybody did, every human that was involved in the chain of this worked through the process, and there were some letdowns, perhaps people not quite understanding.
It cost Fens more than $7 million to fight the blaze over 2 months. And a land-based whitebait farm is being trialled in Southland. The project, led by Manaaki Whitebait, is aiming to provide a year-round supply of whitebait, with a pilot project to be based at Bluff's Ocean Beach Freezing Works. It's been boosted by $1 million investment from the Ministry for Primary Industries. Manaaki says it has successfully bred all 5 New Zealand whitebait species, 4 of which are endangered. Project manager Paul Decker says it has 50,000 breeding adult kokopu whitebait, more than half of the number estimated in the wild. In sport, the England captain Harry Kane is looking forward to what will be a highly anticipated quarter-final against France at the Football World Cup in Qatar, and he's bullish about his side's chances against the defending champions. Kane scored his first goal of the tournament in this morning's 3-0 win over Senegal that propelled England into the final 8.
We've got a great mixture of, youth and experience now, and we enjoy this one, but then of course our focus turns straight to that. It's going to be a really tough game. They're reigning champions, but it'll be a good battle.
France beat Poland 3-1 to advance. New Zealand's 23-year involvement as a host of the World 7 Series will end in January, with the Hamilton tournament to be the last of its kind. New Zealand Rugby has confirmed World Rugby won't consider the country as a stop for the series, which will get a makeover next season. World Rugby wants to make the series into a festival that will attract younger fans. The remodelled 7 Series will have 7 tournaments across 7 months, with men's and women's tournaments running at the same time. And two-time Olympic single sculls champion Mahi Drysdale has won World Rowing's most prestigious award, the Thomas Keller Medal. It's the highest honour in rowing and is awarded to any athlete within 5 years of retirement. Drysdale won gold at the 2012 London and 2016 Rio Games and is a 5-time world champion. That's the news.
A police chase closes in Auckland Road.
A 37-year-old man is in hospital under guard after being hit by a patrol car while he was on foot.
A fresh treaty settlement for Ngāti Maniapoto. And tears of joy for a new drug funded to treat cystic fibrosis.
Overwhelmed, disbelief. There's a general sense of, is this real?
With you on the biggest days, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're on air, online and on your mobile through the RNZ app. You're with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and the Coromandel Peninsula, partly cloudy today. Cloud increasing tomorrow with patchy evening rain. In the west, from Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including Taumarunui and Taihape. Mostly fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow, but longer afternoon fine breaks. Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. Also for Nelson, Marlborough and the Canterbury High Country. Mainly fine. Isolated afternoon and evening showers, mostly about the ranges. For the Canterbury Plains and for Christchurch, cloud clearing this afternoon, then returning tomorrow afternoon with a few showers for the foothills. For Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods. Isolated showers retreating to the ranges tomorrow afternoon and becoming mainly fine elsewhere. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, often cloudy with isolated showers. A period of rain in Fiordland, Southland and Clutha this evening, gradually clearing from the south tomorrow. And for Kohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, showers tomorrow afternoon. It's 7 minutes past 5. I'll have news headlines and traffic for you at 5:20.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint e tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The government's announced a Royal Commission of Inquiry into its COVID response. It will look at the laws and decision-making that drove the government's pandemic response and the impacts that had on New Zealanders and on the economy. Australian-based epidemiologist Professor Tony Blakely will head the inquiry, which is also aimed at preparing the country for a future epidemic. Professor Blakely will be joined by former Cabinet Minister Hekia Parata and former Treasury Secretary John Whitehead. The Prime Minister says the inquiry will be wide-ranging.
And we'll cover specific aspects of our health response, such as our border, community care, isolation, quarantine, as well as the economic response, and that does include broadly monetary policy. We'll not consider individual decisions, such as how policies applied to an individual case or circumstance. We'll also look into the effectiveness of our strategies, including elimination, minimisation and protection.
It'll kick off in February next year, but won't finish until the middle of 2024. COVID Response Minister Aisha Verrill joins us now. Tēnā koe e te minita. Well, the government's long resisted an inquiry, so what's changed? Why now?
No, Lisa, I absolutely welcome this inquiry, and I think it's really important, given the stage we're at, moving past the emergency phase and the pandemic, that we take the opportunity to make sure we learn the lessons of the last 2 and a bit years, and really the opportunity is here to make sure when we're faced with a similar threat again in the future, we learn all the lessons about what worked, what didn't work, and make sure we apply them.
Minister, you may welcome this, but the government has resisted calls from health professionals and other politicians to go ahead with this inquiry. So I'm just wondering why you've decided to do it now.
Oh, well, the response was in a phase where we still had the traffic lights through in August and September, well, they were repealed in September. So we're now moving past that stage where we're having an emergency response. It is totally appropriate now to have this inquiry. The other thing is, though, I think the key point is throughout the acute phase, the emergency phase of the pandemic, we did take a learning approach, and we've had over 75 investigations in the COVID-19 pandemic. They've made over 1,000 recommendations, the vast majority of which have been implemented. So that approach of publicly publishing evaluations has run throughout. Here's a chance where we can finally say that the emergency phase is over and say that have a big and overall and authoritative review of what's gone on and what we need to improve for next time.
So in a nutshell, what is it going to cover? MIQ, yes?
Yes, yep.
Vaccine rollout?
Is included, yes.
Lockdowns and decision-making around mandates?
Correct. All of those things that you'd say would be part of the public health response, public services, contact tracing, testing, as well as the economic response and the impact on other government services like education and corrections, for example. All the laws we used, the works.
So, will it assess whether sacrifices that were directed through policies or government mandates were worth it from a social and emotional point of view?
Those are totally within scope to say whether or not the overall policies, there's what the terms of reference enable that evaluation of the elimination approach, which of course led to lockdowns and border closures. That is all in there.
And how will that be measured then?
Well, I mean, I think you're touching on the complexity of evaluating something as big as the pandemic response. There's the committee, the commission is able to approach that in whatever way they choose. They can choose to take public hearings, but they also have a wealth of data, including comparisons of all the statistics between New Zealand and other countries, plus all the official documents that have been published.
No results before the election. Don't you think people should be able to judge you on the facts?
I think people will judge us on their experience, including the many factual reports that's been published before the election. But we can't rush this Royal Commission. We've looked at all the...
Should you have started it earlier then, so the result was available before the election in the interest of transparency?
I think that in the interest of transparency, we've had over 75 reviews of the COVID-19 response, and all of those have been published and made available.
But you said
publicly.
You need a comprehensive review, which is this, right?
That's right. And it's
wouldn't it be
now,
fair to have done this in time so that people could look at the findings before they go to the polls?
Look, I think people have... this review needs the time to complete its job. When we look at the other reviews, it does need... we've allocated it over 15 months to do that. I think that is an absolutely reasonable thing. New Zealanders have plenty of information to draw on in terms of their assessment of the pandemic response.
So, Minister, when did you start working on this? Because obviously you've revealed the full terms of reference. That would have taken some time to prepare, and securing the people on your board. So how many, months have you been working on it?
To be clear, Minister Nettie is the commissioning minister for this, Minister of Internal Affairs.
But as a minister, you would be privy to the timetable. So when was work commenced on this?
Started work on drawing up the term of reference in June.
In June?
Mm-hmm.
So why has it taken so long to get it across the line?
Because it's taken time to get terms of reference and the panel agreed. And but the important thing is that in September we were still in the traffic lights framework. Now moving past that emergency phase of the pandemic, and this is the appropriate time to start the review.
You're a minister, but you're also a health professional. So can you give the government COVID response a score out of 10, please?
Well, if I look objectively across the country, across the world, at health outcomes and economic outcomes, I've got to say it's an A+.
Out of 10, what would that translate to?
Well, obviously that's 9 or 10 out of 10.
Appreciate your time, Minister. That's Aisha Verrill, the COVID-19 Response Minister. 13 minutes after 5. Kia mau tunu mai. Do stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know your thoughts. Would you give the government's COVID response a 9 or a 10 out of 10, as the Minister would? Text us 2101, or you can email us checkpoint@rnz.co.nz and tell us why. Jacinda Ardern has begun the week on the back foot, defending two of her ministers overseeing contentious projects. The opposition has accused her of being economical with the truth, as she struggled to explain a mistake by Labour. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
No Prime Minister likes to utter these words, let alone more than once.
This was a mistake. It's a mistake. The mistake has been made.
A mistake made last month as Labour pushed its Three Waters legislation through Parliament under urgency. The Greens put up an amendment to try prevent future governments from selling off water assets, requiring a 60% majority vote or a referendum. It passed with Labour's support, despite Cabinet having previously agreed not to pursue entrenchment.
We're taking it as a team and we're going to fix it.
How the mistake was made in the first place remains unclear. Jacinda Ardern won't go into detail, apart from implying that MPs might have assumed the entrenchment threshold was 75% and so doomed to fail. The minister responsible, Nanaia Mahuta, though, certainly knew, and she says she briefed caucus before the vote.
Caucus discussions aren't something that we generally broadcast.
Did Nanaia Mahuta, the minister, mislead you about this?
And actually, we are taking this as a team. There's actually, in my view, not a role for any one individual in this issue.
Nanaia Mahuta declined RNZ's request for an interview. MPs will remove the entrenchment clause tomorrow, but that won't stop the opposition making hay. National's Christopher Luxon says the PM needs to front up.
She's been economical maybe with the truth, and I think it is a real stain on her credibility as a governor or a chair of those meetings. You want to know what's going on, and what she did or didn't know has been really unclear in the explanations we've heard so far.
The Prime Minister's also under pressure over another of the government's projects and its minister. Willie Jackson went on TVNZ's Q&A programme over the weekend to defend the RNZ-TVNZ merger.
Yeah. You're doing you're doing such a negative interview today. I'm very disappointed in you. But if you keep doing negative interviews like this, you won't help, Jen.
The bombastic performance has raised concerns the minister doesn't value or understand editorial independence. ACT's leader David Seymour says the minister has inadvertently revealed the very problems with the project.
The fact that Willie Jackson is a lovable but buffoonish character really should be in charge of running nothing more complicated than a pub.
You saw a very chaotic presentation of the reforms. He didn't seem to understand the key concepts that were in it, and frankly, there is no rationale for why we should be doing it in the first place.
Adding to the merger's woes, a new poll out today shows more than half of New Zealanders in opposition. The 1,000-person survey was conducted by Curia and commissioned by the Taxpayers Union. 54% of respondents opposed the government's plan, with just 22% in support. A further 24% were unsure.
I have confidence in the minister, but again, I will continue to reinforce editorial independence as a bottom line.
The merger is supposed to be in place by March next year, which leaves very little time to pass the legislation in full. Ministers are committed to pushing it through, but they should have the perils of rushed lawmaking fresh in their mind.
And that was Deputy Political Editor Craig McCulloch. Auckland's Mayor is pledging to keep next year's rates rise to less than 5%, despite claiming the city's facing a debt crisis. It's prompting concerns that services will be sacrificed to fill the $295 million budget hole. The Mayor's called for savings of $130 million and he wants to sell its shares in Auckland Airport. Deputy Mayor Desley Simpson says there'll be no impact on projects like Cody Dieback and Clean Beaches for a year at least.
So we're keeping all targeted rates, all right? So I just want to be clear about that. We are keeping all targeted rates. But what we are able to do within our natural environment targeted rate and our water quality targeted rate is reduce that ask from Aucklanders by about 2/3. Now, that doesn't mean we stop the work. we don't. There is money in the bank from those targeted rates so far, and the extra that will come in to keep doing the work that we are doing. And I think that's really important to make sure that you don't let Aucklanders think exactly what you just said, that we will stop doing this. There is money there to do that work.
How much money in the bank, Desley, to do this work then?
We have enough money saved from the targeted rates when they came in to keep doing the work program for the 22-23 year. Sorry, for the 20. What am I talking about?
Okay, so what happens after that then?
Oh, well, we'll have to look at that as part of the LTP. But for this year, the 23-24 year, we will be able to maintain the work program for that year without putting those targeted rates up at the same rate we had been putting them up in the past.
But you're sacrificing future works, aren't you? You can't guarantee that you'll continue on with these projects beyond that time period if you're not bringing the money in.
Well, we have enough money in the bank to do the work for the work program in the 23-24 year. And that's what the year that we're worried about. When we look at the LTP, we'll have another look at it. But we are not stopping the work program that those targeted rates have been brought in to do. We're not stopping that work program. We have enough money to deliver on that in the 23-24 year.
That's short-sighted though, isn't it, Desley? Just one more year.
We have enough money. We have enough money to do the work program. I mean, this is an annual plan.
So, what guarantees can you give then if you were reducing those targeted rates by about 2/3? What guarantee can you give?
For 1 year. Just for 1 year.
Yeah. At the moment, can you guarantee that the rate is going to be reinstated to allow you to do more long-term projects? Or what are you going to do into the future?
I can guarantee we will do the work program for the 23-24 year.
Which takes me back to my original question, Desley. Isn't it short-sighted?
No, Lisa. It's actually delivering. Look, we are doing an annual plan. That is a tweak of an LTP year by year. This is a budget for 1 year. It doesn't prohibit any more work within those targeted rate budget lines. No, it pays for the work program for that year. And I think that's really... that's a key point. It pays for the work. It doesn't keep money in the bank for savings. It actually keeps the work program going. And I think that's important.
Let me put it another way then. Is there going to be any compromise on these projects? Cody dieback, less, as people would put it, code browns on Auckland beaches, climate action, transport projects. Are you going to have to trim any of those things as a result of what you're doing with the targeted rates?
There is no tweaking of the climate action targeted rate. But what I am telling you, there is no tweaking of the work program for the 23-24 year.
Okay, so it's just the future that's up in the air.
Well, we'll address the future next year with regards to a new LTP, but those work programs are important. And the advantage of a targeted rate is that they are ring-fenced to deliver that work, and that's what we will deliver.
So this rates rise of under 5%, 4.66 is what the proposal is. Is that number contingent on selling the shares at Auckland Airport?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you can't achieve it unless you do that.
Well, the way you put a budget together is you do a number of things together to get your final outcome. So where the Mayor was going is to say, right, well, the first thing I'm going to do is to save money within the organisation. I will look at selling the shareholding in the Auckland International Airport. And if we do our savings program, if we sell the airport shares, if we have a prudent use of debt, if we reprioritise our capital spending, if we increase operating profitability from the ports of Auckland, then we can have a rates rise of 4.66%.
Can you just clarify, if you wish to push ahead with the sale of those airport shares, do you need all councillors to agree to that?
Yeah, well, I think you need 75% of councillors.
And what support do you think you have?
Well, I'll know a bit later when the Mayor's had an unofficial chat to councillors as a whole, and I was in the room when that happened. There is more discussion this week, and of course it goes public with the public discussion next week. But the first stage is just asking Aucklanders, and I think that's very important. As a councillor, everyone has to keep an open mind before you ask Auckland, and I think that's a point that Aucklanders need to understand.
And that was the Deputy Mayor, Desley Simpson. It is 23 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoints on RNZ National. Homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. If you're in Auckland, the Mayor is proposing to keep the rates rise below 5% next year, but there is some tweaking of targeted rates. Let us know your thoughts on that, and also the plan is contingent on selling the airport shares. Agree or disagree, and tell us why. 2101 on text, or the email address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to go to the headlines now. Evie is standing very by. Ko Evie anō tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. The government has unveiled its plans for the Royal Commission of Inquiry into its COVID response. From February next year, it will start considering evidence looking into the overall COVID response. The COVID response minister, Aisha Verrill, told Checkpoint that it's appropriate to hold a review now that the acute phase of the pandemic has passed. She says the scope of the inquiry will include MIQ, vaccine mandates, and the government's economic response. A GP who told 600 patients not to get vaccinated against COVID-19 via an unsolicited anti-vax text message has been censured by the Health and Disability Commission. The doctor no longer has a practising certificate. Investigators say a fire that forced more than 30 Northland families out of their homes for days late last year was accidental, and no charges will be laid. Auckland Airport is warning of long waits for travellers during the peak Christmas travel season as a result of staff shortages. Auckland Airport is short of 1,600 staff, and shortages include airline check-in, baggage handling and security. Auckland Mayor Wayne Brown is proposing a $58 million funding cut to help balance the council's books. The draft proposal includes significant reductions in council spending, but Deputy Mayor Desley Simpson said the program the council is keeping targeted rates. I'm sorry, I don't understand that sentence. But Deputy Mayor Desley Simpson has said the council is keeping targeted rates and has enough money to maintain its work program for the 2023-2024 year. I think that was right. And just over 5,300 people have so far voted early in the Hamilton West by-election. 14,000 people had voted in the Tauranga by-election at the same point. The final day for voting is Saturday. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, everything looks pretty usual on the country's main routes at the moment. State Highway 1 between Silverdale and Puhoi, and also between Warkworth and Wellsford in the North Island, will be closed overnight from tonight and also every night until Thursday this week. So plan ahead. I will have more news headlines and traffic at 5:40.
Felt like you were racing in the Grand National there. There were a few hedges to jump. Well done.
I got there.
Yeah, well done. Ngā mihi. After more than 20 years, the World Sevens Series is abandoning New Zealand in favour of more iconic destinations. New Zealand Rugby has confirmed the event in Hamilton in January next year will be the last time the series will stop on our shores. We're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. What do they mean, more iconic destinations? What's wrong with us?
Well, World Rugby is actually shaking up the competition. It's going through a bit of a rebrand at the moment. So from December next year, it's going to be reintroduced. It'll be 7 tournaments in 7 countries across 7 months. So New Zealand doesn't really fit the bill for what they're looking for here.
We're like the 8th country, are we? It sounds like.
We're not the only ones that will be missing out, but they are wanting to make it a festival approach at each of the stops of the countries that they do go to. So they're kind of wanting to make it about more than just rugby. So this is the inclusion of live music, or what they're calling culinary experiences, art and some culture as well. So New Zealand, you might remember, has been hosting this since 2000. So all of those dressed up people heading to Wellington in the heyday, that's not quite the vibe they're going for with the new direction of the Seven Series. So if you do want to see them, they're going to have to get out in January and see them in Hamilton, because as New Zealand Rugby have said that they want to remain on the World Tour, but they haven't been given that. World Rugby has said to them, there's been lots of interest and basically you're just not on the radar in terms of where they want to be. So New Zealand Rugby are saying that they are looking for alternatives, other competitions that they could run instead. But that's going to be a bit of a tight squish on the schedule because those players will be going to those 7 tournaments in 7 countries across 7 months.
I don't know. Let's ask people. Should we be offended by this? 2101 on text. We've got live music. We've got culinary experiences. We've got culture. What's wrong with us? Okay, let us know your thoughts. Let's move on to the quarterfinals, Football World Cup. England are into the quarterfinals, but they could be without Raheem Sterling for the rest of the tournament. This is a terrible story, Felicity. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, that's right. He left the England squad this morning just before the Senegal game. He was headed home because there was an armed intrusion in his home while his family was still in the house in London. So it's not clear.
So this is his 3 kids and his partner.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well, it's not clear who exactly was home, but yes, 3 kids, partner in the house there. And obviously this has shaken up the 27-year-old. Like, it's the second time he's actually being targeted. In 2018, his home, a different home in Cheshire, was unsuccessfully targeted by these people.
Some people, yeah.
Yeah. So footballers are targets for these types of things. And it is said today that it was around about $600,000 worth of in New Zealand dollars of watches that were taken in this. So, I mean, the fiancé and at least 2 of the children had been at the World Cup. They had posted on social media that they were celebrating in Doha, so maybe these people weren't expecting somebody to be home at this time.
Yeah, we're opportunistic in watching social media and maybe turned up. Hey, thank you for that, Felicity. That's a terrible story. Felicity Reid there with our sports news. It is, it's 5:30. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa NINA, called Giles Beckford, who is with us from our Wellington studio. Okay, Giles, a rise in the number of consumer financial complaints. Are we surprised by that?
Probably not, Lisa. Kia ora to you. Yes, this is the Financial Services Ombudsman scheme. This is the non-bank lenders, the industry-backed disputes resolution, where people can't sort out their gripes, their complaints with their finance company or whoever they've borrowed from, then they can go to the service. And there's been a rise in the number of complaints, up around 10% in the past month or so, to record levels. Expectations are that because it's going to get tougher for people, then more people will have their back to the financial wall, and if they can't reach a resolution on their disputes, more complaints will go through to the service. And they put out one example today of where they think the lender made a mistake to begin with by approving a loan which is clearly unaffordable for a consumer. But then when that person got into difficulty, they did the right thing by refunding the interest rates and interest fees that had been paid, and then sold the particular asset that was involved and wiped the balance of the loan. So from that point of view, it worked out well. Praise for the company for doing the right thing in the end. But we may well be seeing a lot more of these sorts of issues next year if the economy, as we keep hearing, does dip into recession in the middle of next year.
So, Giles, people like us will be standing by with interest and excitement. The Commerce Commission issues its final report into the building products sector. That's happening when?
Tomorrow morning, 8:30 is when the report will come out. I never knew that you would be that excited by a Commerce Commission report, but wonders never cease, Lisa. From that point of view, this is not as sexy or as exciting as the grocery study was, or even the fuel
you're underselling it, Giles.
But and I say that because the terms of reference for the inquiry to begin with were a bit limited. So they looked at the flooring, the framing, the roof, the windows, but they don't include, for instance, electricals and plumbing. Now tell me what house doesn't have those from that point of view. But they're looking at those issues. The draft report which came out in August suggested that it was more the system, it was the rules, the regulations that have been getting in the way substantially for cheaper prices for some products. For instance, products get embedded, and this is the famous GIB board one, where building codes around the country from local councils, they specify GIB rather than talk about plasterboard as a generic item. And the Commerce Commission said, well, perhaps we need to have a central register. We need to make it easier for alternative products to be certified, tested, and approved for use, so that we're not always reliant on one brand. Similarly, they said big retailers order vast amounts of product from the manufacturers and they get rebates. They're sort of like a flyby scheme for them. They get a loyalty payment for that. That is an incentive for them to stick with the established supplier rather than look at alternatives. So there were suggestions that perhaps that needs to be looked at. They haven't gone into any detail in particular, for instance, about whether Fletcher Challenge has the monopoly on jibboard, plasterboard, and should any steps be taken against it. Nothing there about, for instance, the dominance or the activities of firms such as Carter Holt Harvey in the timber framing industry. So those issues, they may be discussed in the final report, not expected to, or they weren't featured to any extent in the draft report. Similarly, they made comments about land covenants. Remember, this did pop up with supermarkets where people were buying up land in order to stop rivals setting up shop across the road. They suggested there's some incidents of that in the building industries sector, and perhaps that will be covered. That may have already been covered, in fact, by the government's amending legislation after the groceries report. So I think it'll be about rules and regulations and making it easier for stuff to get in. We'll wait and see if they actually do start to point the fingers at anybody. The words excessive profits were not used by the Commerce Commission in the draft report. That perhaps sets the tone for what the final report will look like.
Well, I shall read with interest. Tell us what's been going on the markets, please, Giles.
Share market, it was in the red for most of the day, but in the past hour, last hour or so, it turned around. So it's finished with a 36-point gain. It's about 1/3%. New Zealand dollar still sitting pretty high at 64.4 US cents. That's close to a 3-4-month high. And 94 Australian. Eyes tomorrow on the Reserve Bank of Australia with its final rate decision for the year.
Thank you, Giles. Giles Beckford joining us live there from Wellington. It's the busiest time of the year for New Zealand Post, with 2.2 million parcels processed through its depots last week. They're dealing with Black Friday orders as well as the usual Christmas trade of goodies coming in and out. But with more parcels coming and going, police are warning people to find a safe spot for their deliveries so that they don't get pinched. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and cameraman Nick Munro have the story.
The Christmas chaos is well underway for NZ Post. If you're waiting on a parcel, it's probably here at the Auckland depot in Highbrook. This is the busiest things have been. 2.2 million items were processed last week, and that's expected to rise to 15 million over the Christmas period. Patrick Pope's the regional manager for North Auckland. He says they've been ramping up staffing and resources to keep up with this year's soaring demand.
We love our Christmas season. We plan for it all year. And we bring on extra resource in the likes of our processing areas, delivery drivers, our call centres. In terms of numbers, we bring on temping resources or fixed-term people. So those could be in the hundreds, depending on the region.
The cut-off for sending Christmas parcels is inching closer, with Express Post now the only option for international packages. For New Zealand addresses, there's just 2 weeks to go. Courier drivers are delivering up to 300 parcels a day at the moment. Most end up here at the Highbrook depot, before they're sent to locations all over the country.
So it comes into the facility by the plane or road network, gets inducted into the site, and we've got this big conveyor belt that it goes on, and it goes through the automation of being scanned and to what chute it goes into, and ultimately it goes into a cage for the courier to be delivered to the customer's home.
But it's getting them delivered safely that's becoming an issue for drivers.
There's obviously lots of opportunists out there that are just looking to steal what they can.
That's Constable Amy Johnston-Rusbatch from the Tactical Crime Unit. She says there are some things people can do to avoid this happening.
So make sure you clearly mark the packages, that you want it left in a safe, secure location, that it's hidden and concealed and it's not visible from the road in plain sight. So if you're getting your package delivered to your home address, make sure that someone is at home to sign for it, or alternatively you can get it sent to your work address.
Scam delivery text messages are also doing the rounds, but NZ Post doesn't send text updates. they're sent via email. Constable Johnston Rusbatch says the best thing to do is to track things online if you're expecting something. She says once the package has been stolen, it becomes a matter for police, with the stolen goods often popping up for sale online.
Some people hold on to it, some people get rid of it straight away. So if you are on Trade Me or Facebook or see any bulk sort of items, then definitely report that to 10-5.
Out with Patrick for some deliveries, he says it can be very tricky for drivers to make sure things get to the right place.
The most information, the better for us. Information, especially units, the number, how to get there, anything that's helpful. Especially in Christmas time, we have a lot of extra resource on the road, and it might be their first time in areas.
But it's best to find an alternative spot at your house to leave things.
Say, hey, there's a bin over there, put it behind the bin, and then you know it's going to be safe.
If that's not possible, play it safe and get it sent to another location to avoid a Grinch ruining your Christmas.
This is when you notice everyone getting their parcels delivered to work at this time of the year. Anyway, some of your feedback on the government's COVID response. The Minister, Aisha Verrall, COVID response Minister, gave her government a 9 or a 10 out of 10 for their COVID response. Most of you agree with that. 10 out of 10, you only have to look to other countries, this listener says. Saving one life is worth a 10, Dave says. This government saved thousands. 9, says another, a pragmatic and practical response to a fast-changing epidemic. But not everyone is that pleased. 3 out of 10, this person says it's not over yet. No Omicron vaccine available, no 5th shot. Only defence now is COVID parties ASAP after the 4th shot. Gary says, I give them 7.5 out of 10. They lose a few points for not staying with the alert levels setting. And Paul's given them a 3. COVID management. Remember the just too late arrival of rat tests. We were told we were first in the queue, only to later find we were the last of the OECD countries. Now we have a Royal Commission of Inquiry conveniently reporting a few months after the general election. It is 20 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homai o whakaro, do keep your feedback coming. You can text us on 2101 or you can send us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Anea Evie, mena pita pita kōrero. Here's Evie with the headlines.
Kia ora, Lisa. The government has unveiled its plans for the Royal Commission of Inquiry into its COVID response. The inquiry will look into the overall COVID response, including the government's monetary policy. But some things, like particular decisions taken by the Reserve Bank's Independent Monetary Policy Committee, will be excluded. A GP who sent unsolicited anti-vax messages to 600 patients has been censured by the Health and Disability Commission and no longer has a practising certificate. 11 people complained to the Commission, which says the GP should apologise to each patient. The Chief Ombudsman is launching another investigation into claims that government agencies are being too slow in responding to Official Information Act requests. The investigation will look into 7 state agencies. No charges will be laid against a far north property owner who caused a massive fire that left 30 families shut out of their homes for days. Investigators say the 2,800-hectare Kaimomo fire started last December was accidental. And the Restaurant Association says it's positive to see sales returning to and surpassing pre-pandemic levels. The association's latest hospitality report shows a 10% increase on pre-pandemic revenue in the year to September. But the association's chief executive, Marissa Bidwar, says skills shortages continue to be the bane of the industry. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic, everything still seems to be moving relatively normally, which is great news. And just a reminder on State Highway 1, north of Auckland between Silverdale and Puhoi, and also between Warkworth and Wellsford, that part of State Highway 1 will be closed tonight and every night until Thursday overnight and opens again at 5 a.m. I'll have more news and weather for you at 6 o'clock.
Kia ora rā, e ho. When it came to power, this government pledged to be the most open and transparent ever. Now, an investigation by the Chief Ombudsman will effectively show whether or not that's true. Judge Peter Bosch's probe will look at whether the Official Information Act is being weaponised to delay or stifle the flow of information, with some government agencies routinely leaving it to the last possible moment to respond. He'll also be delving into the role ministers play in the process and whether there is any evidence of, quote, interference.
This investigation is into agencies, state agencies, not into ministers, Lisa, but there are a number of concerns beginning to really emerge about just how long it's taking for information requests to be answered, not just by journalists, but by members of the public. But journalists in particular take the view that there are now such delays that by the time they get the information, it's more relevant to the history books than the headlines.
I know you say this is into agencies, but leadership comes from the top, right? And from the expectations that the government sets for those agencies.
Yes, it does. Leadership does come from the top, and leadership in particular from ministers and chief executives. We also detected in the report we did called Ready or Not that a number of agencies are routinely asking ministers for a reply within 5 days to a request that they send on. And really we'd like both agencies and ministers to understand that this is not good process for two reasons. One is it delays release, and the second is it can lead to the perception of ministerial interference.
Well, put perception to one side. Judge, how concerned are you that ministers are actually interfering in the process?
One of the things that we will have a good look at when we do this investigation is a raft of issues that we began to feel unease about. I don't have an answer to your question. Otherwise, I would answer it very, very clearly and directly. But there are a number of reasons that we want to go in, lift up a rock and have a look and see what agencies are doing to a request from the time they receive it to the time they answer it. And if there's any unease about the very issue of interference, I think we'll find it.
The fact that you feel the need to look under the rock suggests you are uncomfortable to a certain degree with how things are operating.
There's too much delay. I don't think there's any doubt. There is a perception out there that delays now are more profound than they used to be. Look, the law is that if information is reasonably available, it should be released at the earliest opportunity. There's quite a bit of practice to suggest that information is released on the 20th day, and sometimes to exacerbate things to the frustration of requesters, a transfer then occurs to another agency. I'm hoping that early in the piece, if there's good triage and there's good trained staff, they see early on, can this be released now? And if so, let's do it. Or is a transfer to another ministry desirable? If so, let's get on and do it. You'll see that I am uneasy about what the reasons for delay are, and I need to find out what's going on.
Well, if it is a clinical process, and I don't want to diminish it, but if it is a tick box exercise, if these conditions exist, then this should happen. The only reason that wouldn't happen is whether people are putting an emotion on it. Is there something embarrassing or negative to my department, my government, my minister?
Well, see, that's going to be a perception that I'm afraid will linger unless we investigate and either discount it or find it to be real. I think that, if I might say so, is a really good question. You know, transparency is the thing that leads to trust. And we found that during lockdown, that the more the government shared, the more people were prepared to do things which otherwise were quite coercive. But, you know, there'll begin to be a feeling of distrust if there is a delay and it might be thought to be manipulating for a reason. If that is going to be a perception, it's not going to increase but rather diminish trust.
You've touched on this. I'm a journalist. I'm deeply interested in this. You're the Chief Ombudsman. You're doing an investigation. You're interested. Why does anyone else in this country care about this? Why should they care about it?
Because in the case of local bodies in particular, a lot of people want to know what their city council is doing, why they're doing a project, what they're spending their money on. So for people in the local body context, it's hugely important that there is a really good conduit between the way a council is operating and the way a community is operating. In Wellington terms, sure, it's often just Wellingtonians that want to know what's occurring with some particular agencies, but not so in a raft of Crown entities like Sport New Zealand. All sorts of Crown entities out there involve the length and breadth of New Zealanders. So they want to know often what's occurring over, it might be a medicine, it might be a project, it might be expenditure of money, it might be why a contract's been let to someone. Those are all things for which this Act engenders accountability and transparency.
And that was Judge Peter Bosher, the Chief Ombudsman. It is 12 minutes to 6. Kia mau tunu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Homegrown robotic technology to test golf balls could see a New Zealand company take a swing at new export markets. Golf company Volley teamed up with Canterbury University engineering students to come up with a way to cut the cost of testing new balls that have to meet strict international standards. Normally they have to be sent offshore for testing, and the cost is a major barrier to smaller players. Co-founder of Volley, Kale de Herrera, joins us now. Kia ora, Kale.
Kia ora. Nice to chat with you.
Hey, tell us, what's different about your robotic testing equipment? How is it a game changer?
So, as you mentioned, we're a golf ball company. We're New Zealand's first golf ball company, and we launched 4 years ago, and every time we go to develop new golf balls, look at new materials, we have to send our balls off overseas to a cost of around $1,000 an hour, and to test the extent that we need to test to, it was going to put us in the hundreds of thousands spent each year. So what we commissioned Canterbury University to do was to figure out if there was a way to bring our testing in-house, which would give us the ability to develop quicker, to give access to more data, and we're able to figure out if we could do it at a cost that was feasible for us as a small company. So I guess the reason why we couldn't just go out and buy a robot ourselves is, these things aren't really for sale, for one. There's a lot of IP held. So we had to work with the university guys on building this from the ground up, essentially. We gave them a very small budget to work on, and they had to essentially figure it out themselves, which is what they've come up with is just crazy impressive. The scope of this project was huge. When we pitched it to them, apparently there's a finals year project that the university teams work on for a whole year, and businesses pitch for which project, and we gave them the option for this project, and apparently it was one of the most hotly contested but also scary projects to work on.
Yeah, well, it looks like fun. I'm looking at a video for people who are listening rather than watching of this robotic thing, whacking a golf ball into the way and beyond. It looks pretty impressive. So what you're saying is when you develop a golf ball, in order to get it tested to make sure it meets the standards, you're talking, basically $500,000 to get it through the development and testing phase. I mean, what are you testing for?
So there's two things here. So one, every single golf ball is regulated. So there is actually a regulator overseas called the RNA, and they test for certain rules of the golf ball. So the golf ball can only go a certain distance at a certain swing speed. So what we need to do separate to that, so that's an independent regulator. What we do separate to that is we test to make sure our standards are met before we send them off for regulation. But we are using this more for our own in-house development of the golf ball, and also really to push the barriers of what we can do with golf ball development. We're really constrained to the types of testing we need to do without, having to go offshore to do that. So this gives us that in-house capability.
So the in-house capability means it's less expensive for you, and developing your own robot technology, I mean, how much did that cost you compared to what others would be spending on this?
So the development of this robot and the materials cost us around $20,000 all up. And as I said, the sticker price isn't necessarily advertised. We've essentially extrapolated out of the cost that it would require us to build it. And it's in the hundreds of thousands. to essentially buy one of these.
So to give people a bit of an idea, how big is the market for golf balls?
So the golf ball industry is in the billions, right? Now, we're an extremely small player. The golf ball, most golfers would have heard of Titleist, Callaway, TaylorMade. One of the other reasons of why we built this is we're a new golf ball company. We want golfers to trust our golf ball. So to do that, we want to provide them data around how our golf balls perform relative to the other big brands. And access to that data is very hard to get to. So we want a golfer to come in and say, right, it's all good having a user test a golf ball and say, well, it went this way when I swung it, but there's a lot of variables when golfers are testing it, right? We wanted to have a machine that hits a consistent swing every single time and at a consistent swing speed, and we can say, right, here's our golf ball, and at 100 miles per hour, it performs X, versus a brand that Titleist Pro V1, it performs X. And, we back our golf balls. We just want to prove with data that they perform relative.
So given it is $1 billion market, and I read that the average golfer uses about 100 balls a year, right?
Yeah, correct.
So are you working on something that's biodegradable?
So I'll say this, we are looking at sustainable materials very closely, very, very closely, and we could have something coming up in the near term.
Really appreciate you joining us this evening. Thank you for that. That is the co-founder of Volley, Cale de Herrera, who has, with the help of Canterbury Uni engineering students, come up with this robotic golf ball tester. Rock legends Guns N' Roses are knocking on Wellington's door, arriving in the capital ahead of their Sky Stadium gig on Thursday. It's the city's first international act since COVID-19 hit our shores. But with 25,000 punters heading to the gig, it's been tough and pricey to bag a bed for the night. Lauren Crimp has the story.
Welcome to New Zealand, Guns N' Roses. The band is believed to have touched down in a massive Boeing 767 last night, turning heads at the capital's airport. Fans have had to have patience waiting for their arrival. They were meant to rock Sky Stadium and Eden Park around this time last year, but the pandemic put paid to that. Self-confessed GNR superfan, Spencer Wilson, says he's been thinking about the show every day since he nabbed tickets in November 2020.
I can't wait, in all honesty. It's just not long now. It feels like it's going to be a long time away, but in reality it's not, because I know I'm not going to be able to sleep on Wednesday night just because of the excitement. Like, oh yeah, get to sleep early, but no, I'll just be thinking about it all night probably.
He's flying from Christchurch for both the Wellington and Auckland gigs and says finding accommodation was tough, having to cough up $500 for one night in the capital. About 7,000 to 8,000 concert goers will be travelling from outside the city, but tickets aren't yet sold out. Those who haven't sorted a bed will need to get in quick. Airbnb shows no rooms available on Thursday night, and Booking.com has 8 properties, but the average price is just shy of $800. Hospitality NZ Chief Executive Julie White says it's a nationwide problem. Huge demand with open borders and big shows in town, but low supply caused by a labour shortage.
Accommodation venues are unable to operate at 100%, so their new norm might actually be operating at a 70 to 80%.
She wants the government to do more to beef up the workforce in Aotearoa to fix the problem.
We've had some movement in the immigration settings, but if we were able to be more attractive and compete against the world, like have better pathways to residency, we would actually see more people landing here from overseas. That's a fact.
Wellington Mayor Tory Whanau says it's not just the fans who'll benefit from the Guns N' Roses gig.
I think this is huge for our city. It's also a sign of things to come. We've got some massive events over the next couple of years planned, which is great for our local economy, it's great for our people, and of course it's great for our hotels.
Tory Whanau agrees accommodation is getting tight in the capital, but it's paradise city for potential developers.
I really hugely encourage our developers, international investors to look at Wellington as the place to bring their 5-star to 2-star hotels, because we need a range really, but Wellington is definitely the best city for some new hotels.
Over at Sky Stadium, the grass is green and the stage just about set. Marketing manager Alex Barge says Thursday's show kicks off the return of international acts in the capital, and the experience will be 1 in a million.
They have over 3 hours of just back-to-back bangers. It's going to be a great show. And they're bringing it. They're still performing on stage, you know, Axel, Duff, Slash, they've still got it from what we're seeing out of Australia. So fans can expect a really, really great show.
Fans will be crossing their fingers that Wellington's November rain will give way to some December sun in time for the party.
Not very rock and roll to be looking for a cushy, expensive hotel room to stay in after the concert. They'll be up all night, won't they, Evie? They don't need a bed.
Would you, Lisa?
Yeah, probably not, but anyway. On to COVID and the ratings that people are giving the government for their handling of it in light of the Royal Commission that has just been announced. This person, Peter from Auckland's got in touch to say definitely give the government 9 or 10 out of 10 for all their decisions on the pandemic, except MIQ, says Peter. MIQ earns them a 7 or 8. I note all the international comparisons have New Zealand near the top, he says. On the subject of Auckland's rates, and this is the Mayor saying he's hoping to keep the rates increase below 5%. This listener says there's no debt crisis. That is the lie. Auckland City has a AA rating, and those shares return far more than the cost of the debt. Now, that's the Mayor's plan to sell around $2 billion worth of Auckland Airport shares. Given the value of homes has dropped and the rateable value that the council applied to homes last June is now lower for many homes, I would expect that rates could also be lowered in some cases, says this listener who lives in Auckland. Hugh has got in touch and says, so Wayne Brown will sell Auckland's future so that he can look good for a year. But what then, says Hugh? Sell more assets? And another individual says Wayne Brown should consider selling golf courses and keep the airport. Well, I think actually, looking at a document, that the value of the golf courses owned by the council is just over $2 million, which is about the same value for the airport. And from memory, someone will be able to tell me the cost of upkeep on those golf courses a year, because that's not free. Sevens. Last time for sevens, the next time. This person, Bill, has got in touch to say we should be terribly offended by the decision from the World Sevens administrators.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening, I'm Evie Ashton. The COVID Response Minister has defended the time taken to set up and announce a Royal Commission into the response to COVID-19. Aisha Verrill has told Checkpoint work on the terms of reference began in June. The inquiry will conclude in mid-2024, but Dr Verrill says there's plenty of information in the public domain already to help voters make up their mind ahead of next year's election.
It's taken time to get terms of reference and the panel agreed, but the important thing is that in September we were still in the traffic lights framework. Now moving past that emergency phase of the pandemic, and this is the appropriate time to start the review.
Dr Verrill rated the response to the virus a 9 or 10 out of 10. The inquiry will be led by epidemiologist Professor Tony Blakely from Australia. The Chief Ombudsman believes there are too many delays around the flow of information from parts of the public sector. An investigation is being launched into claims government agencies are too slow in responding to Official Information Act requests. The investigation will look at 7 agencies across the public sector, including Te Whatu Ora, Kāinga Ora and the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. Judge Peter Bosher told Checkpoint delays for official information requests results in perceptions of ministerial interference. Investigators say a 2,800-hectare fire that forced more than 30 Northland families out of their homes for days late last year was accidental and no charges will be laid. A community meeting was held this afternoon. Sam Ollie was there.
Investigators say the Kaimomo fire started on December 18th on cleared land earmarked for avocado orchards. The property owner had a permit to burn debris, but rising temperatures and strengthening winds saw the blaze get quickly out of control. Fire and Emergencies Te Hiku Region Manager Ron Devlin says there's insufficient evidence to prosecute. The fire burned until early February above ground, but it is possibly still burning underground in peat, so is still not considered put out. It cost Fens more than $7 million to fight the fire over 2 months.
Hospitality New Zealand says the government must do more to beef up the workforce because accommodation suppliers can't meet the demand drummed up by international acts. Ahead of Guns N' Roses' Wellington gig on Thursday, Airbnb shows no rooms available and Booking.com has just 8 properties with an average price just under $800. Hospitality New Zealand Chief Executive Julie White says accommodation suppliers are operating at around 80% capacity because they can't get enough staff. She says the government must change immigration settings to make it easier to live and work in Aotearoa. Police are urging people to get their parcels delivered to a safe location and keep an eye out for suspicious behaviour this Christmas. It's the busiest time of the year for New Zealand Post, with 2.2 million parcels processed through its depots last week. Constable Amy Johnston-Rusbatch from the Tactical Crime Unit says if you're not going to be home, it's best to make other arrangements for your package.
So make sure you clearly mark the packages, that you want it left in a safe, secure location, that it's hidden and concealed and it's not visible from the road and in plain sight.
Scam delivery text messages are also doing the rounds, but NZ Post doesn't send text updates. They're sent via email. A land-based whitebait farm is being trialled in Southland. The project, led by Manaaki Whitebait, is aiming to provide a year-round supply of whitebait, with a pilot project to be based out of Bluff's Ocean Beach Freezing Works. It's been boosted by $1 million investment from the Ministry for Primary Industries. Manaaki's Paul Decker says its ambition was to restore and enhance native species that make up the whitebait catch.
Our main aim was to produce the whitebait species for reintroduction into improved habitats, because once the habitat is void of the species, they don't come back. You've got to put some seed fish in that habitat that you've cleaned up, and then they do come back from the wild.
Paul Decker says it has 50,000 breeding adult kōkopu whitebait, more than half of what is estimated to be in the wild. The Immigration Minister has announced that changes to partner work visas will be delayed until April next year. The government was planning a change that would only allow partners of green list workers to get an open work visa. The new policy was originally set to come into effect this month, but Minister Michael Wood announced today these changes will be deferred as they consider feedback from stakeholders, especially around concerns for vulnerable individuals. And construction of the world's largest telescope is getting underway today. The square-kilometre array will be split between sites in Australia and South Africa. When it's completed in 2028, it will be the most sensitive telescope ever built. The BBC's Jonathan Amos reports.
Delegations from the 8 nations of the Square Kilometre Array project are gathering in the remote Murchison Shire in Western Australia and in the Karoo of Southern Africa. Once their ceremonies are complete, the bulldozers will move in to build an astonishing new radio astronomy facility spread across the 2 continents. Thousands of antennas will be erected to observe the sky with unprecedented resolution and sensitivity. Astronomers hope to see the conditions that brought the first stars into existence and to explain dark energy, the mysterious force pushing the cosmos apart at an accelerating rate.
That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, soft cubes of curdled soybean milk. The Fridge Light looks at tofu. Officer Karen O'Leary teams up with the NZSO and chooses Peter and the Wolf by Prokofiev. And a UK virologist reveals the unusual origins and evolution of Omicron and explains the risks of dangerous new variants. Plus sport, music and dance. Join us on Nights with Karen Hay after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. We're on air on rnz.co.nz and on your mobile. You're back with Lisa Owen next on Checkpoint. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Tuesday for Northland, Auckland and the Coromandel Peninsula. Partly cloudy today, cloud increasing tomorrow with patchy evening rain. In the west, from Waikato to Kapiti Coast, including Taumarunui and Taihape, mostly fine today. Cloudy periods tomorrow, but longer afternoon fine breaks. Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. Also for Nelson, Marlborough and the Canterbury High Country, mainly fine. Isolated afternoon and evening showers, mostly about the ranges. For the Canterbury Plains and for Christchurch. Cloud clearing this afternoon, then returning tomorrow afternoon with a few showers for the foothills. Bulla and Westland, cloudy periods, isolated showers retreating to the ranges tomorrow afternoon and becoming mainly fine elsewhere. For Otago, Southland and Fiordland, often cloudy with isolated showers. A period of rain in Fiordland, Southland and Clutha this evening, gradually clearing from the south tomorrow. And for Te Kohu, Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, showers tomorrow afternoon. The time is, well, it's 7 minutes past 6, coming up to 8 minutes past 6. I'll have more news headlines for you at 6:30.
Nā mihi, Evie. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The National Party has increased its lead over Labour in the latest One News Kantar public poll. Labour's dropped 1% to 33%. Meanwhile, National's popularity has inched by 1%. Up to 38%. As for the minor parties, ACT has jumped up 2 points to 11%. The Greens are steady on 9%, and New Zealand First has inched up 1% to 4%. Te Pāti Māori remains steady on 2%. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, joins us now. So, Jane, the trend is not Labour's friend.
The trend is not Labour's friend, Lisa, but actually with this poll, they might actually be breathing a sigh of relief given a rough couple of months that they've had, and to only have dropped 1%, actually they might not see that as such a bad thing. What they will really be looking at is that downward trend that seems to have settled for Labour. It seems to be plateauing off, but it's that trend that we're looking at. It's been a line downwards through the year. It's actually a very similar result to the July survey in the One News Kantar public poll, except for New Zealand First. And back in July, they were at 2.6, but New Zealand First, of course, with leader Winston Peters really starting to nudge up, and they're at 4% in this poll, just below that 5% threshold to get into Parliament if a party doesn't have an electorate seat.
So, just to put this in context, from what I can see, the poll was taken between the 26th and the 30th of November, right? And if we think the kind of things that were going on at that time, the Prime Minister was visiting Sandringham after the death of a dairy worker there, Janak Patel. Obviously, National Party had launched its boot camp policy and was really pushing the message soft on crime. That's some of the context, obviously, to that. Christopher Luxon is up 2 points in the preferred Prime Minister stakes. Has he done anything to deserve that, or is it just that the Prime Minister has assisted him in some way?
I think the story is about Labour, as I said, having a pretty rough couple of months with lots of big, crunchy, difficult issues, and National just not making any mistakes. So they're just holding steady. They've been taking a consistent line in terms of opposition against the government. But when you look at that bigger picture too, remember the cost of living, the OCR, the Reserve Bank coming out warning about recession, painting a pretty dire picture for next year. And that's reflected actually in one of the areas in the survey that there was the biggest movement, and that's in the number of people who feel pessimistic about the economic outlook. That is up 23 points to 61%. But I think you can see what's driving that, and again, the cost of living crisis and people really starting to feel that, especially as they approach Christmas. But also, you know, we've got COVID, we've got crime. There's a lot of stuff swirling underneath this. Under these numbers, National and ACT would have enough to form a government together. They would have 64 seats. Labour and the Greens would have 53, and even if you add Party Māori, 56. So really they're starting to come back in terms of that, I suppose, right-left block. National and ACT still looking pretty healthy as a block there. And if it came to it, of course, Christopher Luxon has not ruled out New Zealand First. Looking ahead, looking at the tea leaves, they wouldn't necessarily need New Zealand First, again, based on these numbers, if they were to translate into an election result next year.
Talk to us about the Prime Minister's personal rankings in essence. So Jacinda Ardern, 29% in the preferred Prime Minister stakes, down 1. People would have argued that she was one of the party's greatest assets, right? And still is. So what's going on here?
Well, a lot of the disillusionment, a lot of the resentment and unhappiness with the government is directed at her personally. And as we see in politics, that leadership role is so crucial when things are going well. When Labour was polling those record high numbers, it was a lot to do with her personality, with her personally, how she was leading the government as a very public and visible head figure. And of course, on the flip side, when people start to lose confidence or they start to turn off the leader, you obviously see that translated through the preferred Prime Minister stakes, but also in that party vote. So we've seen that downwards trend for her, as well as the Labour Party. Look, they're just going to be looking for a reset, I think, over Christmas. I think we've got 2 weeks left of the sitting block before Parliament rises. I think Labour will be looking for to get through this next couple of weeks for the House to have a summer break and hope that people come back a bit more refreshed, leaving some of the bad political memories behind them. But really, they've got a huge job ahead of them next year. The problem with these sorts of things is they tend to embed. People start to, not make up their mind, but I think with these numbers, you can sort of see them settling around into these mid-30s for Labour and National. So it's very, very difficult for the incumbent to turn that around. And really, it's up to National just to keep steady, not make mistakes. But really, they should be capitalising more as well on Labour's failures and troubles. I would have thought National would be looking to have been a bit higher in this poll as well.
Okay, so that is a good point. And they are just inching ahead little bit by little bit, 1% this time round. Yet ACT, who's obviously on a lower percentage base, up 2 points. What will National be thinking about that?
I think Act 2 has a little bit more freedom to maybe be a little bit more controversial, to push things out a little bit in terms of attracting a bit more publicity or talking to a new audience. National, does have the responsibility of potentially being the main party in government next year. So they have to be measured in terms of what they say, but it doesn't hurt them as long as ACT doesn't surge too far away and take too much of their vote. It suits National to have a strong ACT alongside it, because if the votes are sort of moving around and it's going to ACT, then they wouldn't, be too overly worried about that. They would be worried if they started to lose support back across the aisle to Labour. So I think slow and steady is the game for National. If they're incrementally, even slowly building that support, then that's probably more sustainable than having big lurches of support around. But as I said, Christopher Luxon now more than a year in the job. He has stabilised the National Party ship, but really I think they'd be wanting to end this year on higher numbers given what Labour has experienced over the last couple of months.
Thank you, Jane. That's Jane Patterson, RNZ political editor there. It is 14 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. To Iran now, where the future of the Iranian morality police is unclear tonight after state media pushed back on comments that the much-feared force is going to be disbanded. World Watch's Phil Vine reports.
Iran's morality police have become synonymous with repression. Human rights groups say it was officers from this force who arrested 22-year-old Mahsa Amini for not wearing her hijab properly.
She died in their custody, and that's when protests swept the entire country.
Azadeh Mashari reports for the BBC in Iran. According to experts and Iran watchers, rumours about the demise of the morality police might have been somewhat overcooked. The original comments came from the top. Iran's Attorney General, Mohammad Jafar Montazeri.
The Attorney General made this statement very passively when he was attending a seminar and was asked by a person, why aren't we seeing the morality police anymore? In Farsi, and the language of Persian, it's known as a guidance patrol.
Siavash Ardalan from the Persian service.
So he was asked, why aren't we seeing these guidance patrols anymore? And he said, well, they have been disbanded. Just like that.
A whole news cycle was devoted to the abolition of the police force who oversee Iran's Islamic Code of Conduct.
What we're talking about are some throwaway comments from the Attorney General during a press conference when he was asked about this by some reporters. And the morality police, it's important to say, isn't even part of the judiciary. This isn't even his department. So this is by no means confirmed.
In the last few hours, state media has quashed the story. saying the responsibility for the morality police lies with the Interior Ministry, not the judiciary. Mas Mashiri considers the AG's seemingly offhand comments may have served a purpose.
So the government might be tempted to see whether a few changes here and there, answering a few demands, could appease some of these protesters.
This comes as Iran's parliament and judiciary are reported to be reviewing the decades-old law that requires women to cover their heads, perhaps a sign that the Iranian government might be courting reform, or they're simply trying to gauge the public mood.
How receptive are they really to reform? And that's the real test. Are people going to be able to be satisfied with this vague promise of reform when they haven't been calling for a policy change? They've been calling to dismantle the whole system.
Observers say the morality police have hardly been seen on the streets since Mahsa Amini's death. And responsibility for the brutal crackdown rests on the shoulders of other security forces, a repression that's seen thousands arrested and hundreds killed.
Phil Vine reporting there. British actress Kate Winslet has waded into the debate on social media controls, saying parents feel utterly powerless to help their children. She's made the comments ahead of the launch of her new film, I Am Ruth, where she joins her own daughter, whose character becomes increasingly consumed by the pressures of social media. Meanwhile, the UK government's debating law changes to control the worst impacts of big tech. The BBC's Angus Crawford reports.
Perhaps more than any other, it's Molly Russell's story that influenced the online safety bill and alerted parents to the potential power of social media to do harm. Molly took her own life after being exposed to a stream of negative content.
What's the matter? Nothing.
Now, a powerful new drama about the damage of online addiction, destroying family relationships.
It's not perfect. Please stop. You are driving me to do this.
Starring Kate Winslet and her daughter Mia.
I really do struggle with social media. I struggle with the impact it's clearly having on teenage mental health. I do wish that our government would crack down on it. I do wish that there would be certain platforms that were banned before a certain age.
And she wants accountability.
Parents are left flailing, going, well, thank you so much, government. Look what just happened to my child. And how can you possibly tell me that, oops, it's not my fault? There's people shirking responsibility all the time.
Online safety bill does complete.
The answer might be the online safety bill.
With the online safety bill.
Delayed.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for...
And amended. It's taken years. But will be back before the Commons tomorrow. It contains new clauses, criminal offences around pornography and self-harm content, but dropped are plans for ministers to decide what legal material should be classified as harmful for adults and be taken down by the platforms. Although today the Conservative Party chairman seemed to want a further tightening of the rules.
What we've got to do for both children and adults, I think, is make sure that things like self-harm images should be illegal, and that's how you deal with them. But the right balance to strike is between that, free speech and freedom of expression, as well as dealing with this.
Labour, though, wants to bring back the legal but harmful clause.
If you look at what that is around, it's Russian disinformation, it's misogynistic organising online, the kind of so-called incel culture. There's a lot out there in that online space that I think goes beyond the impact on children and young people.
Who on earth is possibly messaging you at that time of night anyway?
Drama which reflects real-world concerns about social media. And in front of MPs, a complex bill, years in the making, dividing opinion, trying to right that balance between family and big tech.
The Football World Cup has been a tournament of high drama with lots of giant-killing upsets. And it's teams from Asia-Pacific that have delivered some of the most extraordinary David and Goliath moments. The BBC's Shaima Khalil reports.
Melbourne's Federation Square erupted in celebration last week, with Australian fans in raptures as their side beat Denmark to secure a place in the knockout stages. For those who've travelled all the way from down under, it was all worth it. Even though Australia's dreams have been dashed by Argentina, they go home a proud squad.
Probably better than expected domestically, but for those of us who are here, we always view the round of 16 as the goal. So yeah, I'm pretty happy.
I feel incredibly proud. These boys have come from, not a strong football nation, and they have worked their guts out.
We don't have the history that some of these South American and European teams have, but maybe it's the start of a new legacy.
And that's what the World Cup's all about, right? It's bringing teams that wouldn't ordinarily be on the big stage, bringing them to the big stage.
It was tears of delight and disbelief for the South Korean fans and players as the team seized their place in the knockout stages, beating Cristiano Ronaldo's Portugal 2-1. But before they could celebrate, the players then huddled around a phone to see Uruguay fall short and exit the World Cup. Japan has been an astounding presence in this tournament. They beat the 2010 World Cup winners Spain, making it to the last 16 and kicking the 4-time world champions Germany out as they landed on top of their group. The Samurai Blue are taking nothing for granted as they get ready to face Croatia. The performances of these teams may have taken their opponents by surprise, but their success so far was not by chance.
The reasons for they are doing well is just the background of their own players. They have now the experience with the European football, and they are learning quite a lot of things, and not only the techniques and tactics, but also the mental side as well. So that has added some kind of changes to their football, and which is kind of put everything together.
These Asia-Pacific teams have given their fans so much to cheer for and have left some of the biggest squads in the world scratching their heads at times. They've been fearless on the pitch, and many are now asking whether this could be the start of a new era of football.
With the Socceroos now out, Japan and South Korea both brace for their next fight as they face Croatia and Brazil. Two games that could potentially deliver more jaw-dropping upsets. Win or lose, those teams have proven themselves worthy opponents against the giants of the game.
In Brussels, 10 men are on trial for a terrorist attack there in 2016. 32 people were killed by 3 suicide bombers in the attacks at a metro station and the airport. It was the deadliest event on Belgian soil since World War II. Those on trial are accused of orchestrating the explosions. 6 of them have already been convicted for the terror attacks in Paris in November 2015, which killed 130 people. The BBC's Nick Beake reports.
There's been an attack on the metro, and just as soon as I heard that, it was, you can feel like the bottom just fall out of your world.
It's 6 years now since terror shattered Charlotte's life. She and her partner David had made Brussels home, and it's where they were bringing up their son Henry. 3 days after the suicide bombings on the city, a Belgian police social worker rang her.
It was dark. I was walking the dog around the streets, and she told me that David wasn't one of the living before living, and I had to prepare for the worst.
But it was a phone call?
It was a phone call, yeah, to say basically, your partner is dead.
David was the only British victim, one of 16 people murdered on the metro. An hour earlier, 16 others had been killed at the main airport. Charlotte channeled her grief into campaigning for victims of terror and wants to travel from the UK to the Brussels trial to make a statement.
I think having David appear in that court and being able to draw a picture of David by someone who really loved him, it will give me some peace, because in this process he's basically a victim person, a list of injuries, of fatal injuries, a place where he was found.
She was like an angel. She was beautiful. And when we talk about love, Lubna talk.
Lubna was Mohammed's wife. He said he wanted to create a jihad of love after she was murdered in the attacks. His home is still in the Molenbeek area, where some of the accused lived and were sheltered.
I sincerely hope the terrorists will take the path of redemption, because for me, to condemn them as they are, with the same ideas in their heads, that would be a failure for all of us. I am terrified about what the trial will bring. It could do us so much damage, because it would throw us back into the biggest crisis of our lives. So I will stay away.
Charlotte will be there, though, with a message.
They destroyed some of us, but we come together and we're stronger, and that's why they won't win.
To Australia now, and researchers across the ditch have discovered the remains of the last thylacine, also known as the Tasmanian tiger. Now, the creatures became extinct in the 1930s, with the last remains thought to be long since lost. But they've been found sitting right under the noses of researchers for decades, hidden in a cupboard. The ABC's Claudia Long has more.
Taking pride of place on the Tassie coat of arms, the thylacine has been extinct since the 1930s. The last one, Benjamin, kept in captivity until his death. Where Benjamin's remains ended up, though, has been an enduring mystery until today. Tasmanian tiger expert Dr. Bob Paddle was key to finding what's left of Benjamin.
It survived for only a few months in the zoo and died during the night of the 7th of September 1936. The zoo archives record the fact that the animal was sent to the museum.
The last days of the thylacine were far from happy.
The cage of the thylacine wasn't being cleaned, there were faeces spread about, there were days when it wasn't fed, other days when rotting meat was left beside.
But now, decades later, a bittersweet discovery.
We have discovered the remains of the very last thylacine which died, the endling of the species, on the evening of the 7th of September 1936. But that isn't it.
It's been a team effort, with Honorary Curator of Vertebrate Zoology at the museum, Catherine Medlock, one of those leading the search. It turns out the remains have actually been on display to the public fairly recently, but the museum didn't realise that they belonged to Benjamin.
This particular skin and skeleton that we've discovered has rarely been on display. The skin was only on display for a very short time in the late 1990s in a travelling exhibition. We didn't know then it was the last one.
She says there were a number of reasons Benjamin's body went missing. Basically, thanks to an admin error.
It wasn't recorded in the museum's registers, which is where specimens are recorded for coming in.
But what will happen with the remains now? They'll spend some time on display, but unlike in the 90s, visitors will actually know exactly what they're looking at. That's something Catherine Medlock is looking forward to.
They are the actual objects, it's not reproductions, it's the real thing. And that's the power of museums, as opposed to maybe photograph galleries or films or TV or whatever where you can see these species.
And that was Catherine Medlock there from the Tasmanian Museum of Art ending that report. That is about all we've got time for. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi o Pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up, we'll be making you feel bad about your lifestyle choices, all goody, by speaking with a man who's won the Christchurch, Queenstown and Auckland marathons and now the 60k Kepler Challenge before going diving in Milford Sound to wind down. While here at Checkpoint we wind down by eating chocolate and chips. We're fully engrossed in the gorge part of the Gorge and Rest festive season. We go fast and early. Started in January. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, ko Evie Ashton tēnei. There's little movement between the two major parties in the latest One News Kantar public poll, with Labour down 1 point to 33% and National nudging up 1 to 38%. National and ACT, up 2 points, would still have enough support, according to this poll, to form a government. The COVID response minister has defended the time it's taken to set up and announce a royal commission